Not that I don't know. I don't know what I'm doing, so I just checked. And a little bit of housekeeping before we jump into the video. The carbon fiber seat giveaway is 1 week away. Please go visit the first link in the description, make a comment on the video, and you're automatically entered to win, 100% free. Second and exciting, Total Boat was kind enough to supply all of the resins for this project. If you use any of the links in the description, you'll actually receive 5% discount. It'll help me out, help you out. Please use those. And then lastly, I need some advice on the paint scheme for this helicopter. I know what I have in mind, which is blue and kind of elegant, but I want to see maybe what you guys have. So think about that. I'll have more at the end of this video. We got the helicopter into the dirty portion of the basement. We need to get the flanges all sanded down on this thing so that I can start doing some more body work. So for instance, we have to get the flange from the boom to the fuselage, from the bell to the fuselage, and then there's some leftover, I don't know what they used, for this epoxy or whatever it is, but there's bulges everywhere. And then finally we have to get back to the boom and make the boom really nice where the seam is. So that's what we're going to be doing in here. It's just going to be really messy. Frankly, it's not going to be fun to watch, so you'll probably not see much of it. And I'm not looking forward to it. This part of the process completely sucks. So the reason for the sudden departure of the foam and creating the plug is because I'm actually going to be pulling sections of the mold for that rear cowling directly off of the fuselage. And so if there's anything wrong with the fuselage, like these flanges and etc., those imperfections are going to get transferred directly into my mold, which will transfer directly into my carbon part. So I need to now take a pause, come back and fix the fuselage to a point where it's basically ready to paint. That way, once I pull this carbon fiber part off in the future, that it will mate as close as possible to the fuselage after all the body work. And that way I don't have any gaps and I can avoid big seams or adding a lot of filler. So that's the reason behind taking this kind of step and fixing the body where it is. So the tools we're going to be using to get all of this down, the bulk of it, anything big and rough, I'm going to be doing with an angle grinder and a sanding pad. This is 40 grit. That should make pretty quick work for all the big heavy stuff. After that, I did go out and buy a really long kind of, it's a soft like sanding block. So this should do contours really nice and conform to the geometry and not leave any like nasty spots. So that's pretty good. And then we have just the old foam block that I had from before. So that's what I'm going to be using. Oh, I have one more thing. I also bought sandpaper on a roll. So this will go on the longer sanding block, and then we can also use it just as like a wrap, and I can kind of, I don't know, saw around this boom and get a nice shape. So that's the idea. This is 220. I think that's plenty to get the rough down. So that's what we're going to tackle. I don't know. It's going to suck, but we're going to get there. I got both flanges down as far as I think they need to be. There is kind of a valley where the two pieces meet from the bell to the fuselage, so we're going to have to fill that in with some filler, but I was planning on that anyways. There's also, once again, another valley between the bell and the tailboom. This one I think is going to be a little more challenging just in the way that they mate together, and if I put a nice, I guess, if I fill that void in with filler, it's gonna close the seam between the boom flange and the bell. And so I'm worried how that's gonna separate. I don't know, we'll cross that bridge when we get there. I'm not sure how that's gonna turn out yet, but we're gonna give it a go anyways. And then finally, I was able to get a decent amount done on the tail boom, but I also realized this is gonna be way easier if I can just get the boom off and work on it independently. So we're gonna do that. So I had a second thought. I don't know why I'm trying to fill the gap between the edge of the flange to the bell. I should just be fixing the bell. So that'll eliminate any issues with filling that crack and these two parts not separating. So I think I'm just gonna pull the boom off now, and I'll make the bell look pretty. I know that the mating surface between the bell and the boom is good, and so as long as I leave those alone, then the two will go back together and it'll look pretty. So I think that's the path forward. We're gonna take this apart and just approach it as two pieces. Well, based on how, I mean, it wasn't difficult, but it wasn't easy. Based on how difficult the boom came off of these bolts, and I can kind of tell they aren't all exactly perpendicular. They're a little wonky all the way around. That's why it was holding it on a little bit. I'm going to take these bolts out for the main reason. It's just going to be easier, I think, to put the boom back on and to make sure that I can break them loose of the JB weld that we put in before. Well, this must be the episode of changing my mind. I started backing these out and realized it was a pain in the butt because I don't have a power tool, and decided to only go most of the way out so that when I put it back together, I don't have to waste as much time. It should slip on over these bolts now that they're shorter and they're not as far out of whack. So that should solve the getting on problem. I also noticed when I was pulling these off, someone made the comment in a previous video I should have just used a bolt with a larger face to make that flat spot. I'm wishing I would have done that now, and I'll show you here in a second, but the JB weld basically captured some of the washers and so I'm gonna have to get back in here with a Dremel at some point, Dremel away the amount of JB weld that's capturing those washers so that I can pop them back out and replace them with good AN hardware. So reason number two why I'm not pulling these all the way out, because basically I'm kicking this bucket further down the road. After I got the tail boom hung, I didn't realize it, and I should have, it was way too wobbly left and right to really enable me to sand this well. So I ended up putting a second strap down to my routing table. And now you can see this thing's pretty solid. There's not much tension in here. I don't want to mess up the boom, but it holds it perfect. Another piece of information, even though you didn't ask for it, I always struggled to figure out which way to put the rope into these ratchet traps because I don't use them very often, until in college a buddy told me put it in the butt and out the mouth, and that has stuck ever since. As long as you put your ratchet traps in that way, they work every time. There's two issues with this boom that we're trying to solve with this setup. So the first is these big alligator patches. They are divots, so I'm gonna have to add some bulking material, some filler in there to fix that divot. And then the second is the seam line. I'm assuming they make this boom with two halves, two molds that come together. They put it in, and then there must be some form of layup on the inside, which actually makes it all strong. But in doing so, you get this nasty seam. Two problems with this. One, it leaves positive material where the seam is, but two, this wasn't actually aligned perfect, and so you can't really tell on camera, but this side of the boom is shifted slightly down compared to the other side, and so I actually have a low spot in here. So what I'm going to be doing is basically sawing with a piece of, or a strip of tape, and this should match the contour of the, I guess, the cylinder or the cone, and that should do a good job at mainly removing the high spots, so that'll get rid of everything high. To get rid of the low, I'm probably going to have to come in with some filler, and same thing with fill these areas here. So you can see I've kind of started this already. Over here is most of the way done and looks pretty good. I think it's as far as I'm going to go without adding filler because I don't want to get too thin. And then this is what we started with. So I got most of the boom prepped, and in doing so I was paying close attention to the seam line because I didn't want to sand through that seam line or cause anything to reduce the strength of that seam. And unfortunately, we did run into a problem. You can see here, there's some sandpaper stuck in that seam. And from what I can tell, it's just over about a 5-inch section. It doesn't go all the way through, so there is something holding this together, but it still was an area of concern. I immediately called Composite FX. They informed me how this thing is manufactured and gave me some advice. They think it's going to be okay and kind of pointed me in the right direction. I also investigated just by looking and seeing and understanding how it is manufactured to give my own opinion, considering this is my helicopter that I'm building. And so that's what I'm going to share. So this boom is constructed with continuous fiber tip to tip. So one continuous piece, that's what gives it all its strength. They, on both sides, they have a lap joint. It's about a 1/2 inch I guess wide, and they use an adhesive called methyl methacrylate, if I pronounce that correctly. I'm not a materials guy. I hated it in college and I'm still not great at it, but basically it sounds like it's a really, really good adhesive that needs little to no prep and can replace rivets and in some cases welding. So really good adhesive. The good news is it doesn't go all the way through. So it is bonded, but it's only bonded at the tip, from what I can tell, the tip of this piece as it goes into the other one. Everywhere else on that seam, on both sides, seem to be just fine. They're fully bonded. They aren't delaminating anywhere. It didn't poke up like this one did. So this is the only problem child. I think what I'm going to do to make me feel better about all this is I'm probably going to use JB Weld. I was thinking about using epoxy and some microfiller, but that's not that structural. I really want this bond back. I know JB Weld works really well. And so I'm probably going to mix that up and squeeze it into this seam and fill out in that whole void. Callie from the future here. A couple days later, it kept me up late actually that night thinking about this bond and this issue. And I started to question why I was using JB Weld or epoxy-based adhesive when the manufacturer was using that MMA adhesive. And so I went into a deep dive on what the differences are and if I could get any. And basically what I learned was epoxy-based adhesives, although very strong, they end up being more rigid, so you don't have as much flex. And they don't bond as well to unprepped surfaces or dirty surfaces. The MMA, which don't ask me to pronounce it again, is an acrylic-based adhesive. And that acrylic-based adhesive strives in unprepped surfaces. It also does well in dirty surfaces, and it doesn't harden as it cures. Well, it hardens, but it doesn't harden to the point that epoxy does once it's fully cured. So there's still a flex in that adhesive, which paired with fiberglass or composites, they also flex very well. And my main concern was putting an epoxy bond into this seam, it being more rigid than the rest of the seam, and you would actually put stress risers more specifically at the edges of those bonds, which could cause a premature failure over time at, I'm assuming, the ends of that seam or of that bond. So should have done this from the start. Don't be lazy or cheap or use what you have. Go get the right stuff for the job and use that. It is just a void. I think adding that adhesive in there will fix all these problems. To be frank, I'm relatively confident that even if this was left alone, it would be just fine. I do have the boom supported on both ends. I did put my entire body weight, which is significantly more than this boom should ever hold, in the middle. So it was so it was supported on each end, and then my weight was in the middle. I'm pretty confident that this thing is going to be just fine. Anyways, peace of mind. We're going to throw some JB Weld in here and fix that joint where it didn't fully get bonded. And then we're just going to continue to go. So another thing, and this is getting long-winded already, but I had already kind of thought about a way to check on my annuals if these composites are still good. I don't want this boom to ever be an issue. And so it just one of those thoughts running around my head. I thought of a way that at every annual, I'll put a weight basically on the tail and measure the displacement. That'll give me the spring rate basically of the tail boom, and I can monitor how that's changing over time. And so I'll do that once it's fully assembled. And then once again, over time, I'll plot that. And if that chart ever starts to fall off, then I know that there's something structurally wrong with my boom and I should probably go do something about it. So I'm doing whatever I can to make it safe. Once again, I'm going to be pretty confident that this is going to be okay once it's done. I've basically proof loaded it with my body weight, which is significantly more stress than this thing should ever see. And so I'm confident, and I should be, to use this on the helicopter. All right, guys, here's what I got going. I have the boom, I think for the most part, scuffed down and prepped. All the high spots are sanded down, and I think we're pretty good to go there. There's a few different things that I'm trying to tackle, so we'll try and go over those quickly, and then I'll show you the tools that I'm going to try and use to fix them. So the first one is the seam. The seam has actually some like pores in it from when I went into the fiberglass, and so you can see the strands, and it's actually tried to catch some dust, but I blew it out with just an air compressor, compressed air, and it took all the dust out of those fibers. So that's nice and clean. So I need to clean up the seam, and I need to get rid of those pores. So that's one. Two, this edge, although it's halfway okay, you can still feel it. So I need to fill that with some filler and get that smoothed out when, so it's ready for primer and paint. So that's the second one. The third one is I have these features down here, which are basically bonded on fiberglass, and there's a step. And so I need to clean it up because this is a non-mold surface, so that's ugly. And then I need to fix the step. And there's one here. That's for the vertical fin. And then there's one on the other side here. And then finally, the last thing I have going, I guess there's two. I'm kind of lying to you already. The last thing I have going on is this alligatoring that needs to get filled. That's just some fairing combat or something. That's not a big deal. So that's not that bad. And then I have on this flange over here, there's a pretty big, I guess, void that I need to fill in, and that's right near a bolt head. And so I don't want that to compress over time. So I need that portion to be super rigid. So here's my thought. I need to fill with like a fairing compound just to make things pretty. I need to fix the seams that have the pores. And then I need to fill the gaps between the carbon or the fiberglass pieces. So that's just make it look pretty. And then I need a structural seam. This is my ammo that I have to throw at this. I have micro balloons from Total Boat. I have Total Boat 5:1 epoxy resin, slow, so that'll cure pretty slow. And then I have Total Boat Total Fair epoxy fairing compound. To be honest, I have no freaking clue what I'm doing. And unfortunately, all of the good advice that I get is after these videos are posted and you guys say something in the comments. So unfortunately, I don't get to get your advice when I need it, which is now. I've never used micro balloons before. I have no idea how that works, other than just mixing it together, and it makes it thicker without adding weight. So that, from what I can tell and have read, it makes a good fairing compound. That just gets mixed, obviously, into your epoxy resin. It's compatible. I checked. Not that I don't know. I don't know what I'm doing, so I just checked. Apparently, it's compatible. Total Fair fairing compound. The only thing that scares me about this stuff is what I encountered on the seat mold. If any of this is exposed after even though I'm not making a mold, I don't know if this is going to make whatever paint I use angry and not cure. So this stuff kind of scares me for future painting. But this stuff doesn't, because it's just epoxy and it should be fine. Oh, I forgot. I also have one more thing. I have chopped up fiberglass, so that I can use for structural stuff. So here's what I'm thinking. For the seam, I think I'm just going to use straight epoxy. I'm not going to put any micro balloons or anything in it. I'm just going to run a seam of epoxy down and let that kind of seep into the micro pores and let it cure overnight, and then I can just sand that down and it should get rid of the pores. Once that's done, then I'm going to come back and I'm going to fill all these areas with, I think, micro balloons and epoxy. I think I'm going to avoid the fairing compound. So that will fix the lows basically in the seam. That'll fix the chamfers that I need to put on the fiberglass parts, and that will fix the alligatoring down back here. And then finally, I think for the void that's over there by the flange, I think I'm gonna mix up some epoxy and some fiberglass chop and put it in there. I hear it works way better for structural stuff, and I also hear it's a nightmare to sand, which should be fun. But I really don't want that to compress or break up over time. So that's the plan. Full transparency, no clue what I'm doing from here on out. I have no clue how to paint. I have none of this stuff, but you know what? You gotta learn, right? Something I've noticed about doing things that you hate is that if you go straight through, you end up at a point where you think it looks really good, probably because it was so horrible when you started. But if you give yourself a break and come back at some other time, I've noticed I see things that just look way worse than I originally had thought, and it gives you that extra push to make it that much better. I may be justifying, but I'm over this right now and I want to stop. And so I'm going to leave this where it's at. It's 90%, it's close enough. I'm going to get the boom back on the helicopter, and we're going to go back to something that actually feels fun to me, which is creating that plug. And that way I can take a break. When all of that is said and done, I can come back again and with a new set of eyes, look at all this and just take it the rest of the way to make it look really pretty. So as I mentioned in the beginning of the video, I need some help on the paint scheme for this helicopter. This is what I like and what I thought would look good, but I am definitely no artist, and I'm sure many of you are better at this than I am. So I'm gonna leave up a blank canvas of the helicopter for you guys to pause the video and take a picture of. If you feel inclined, please go ahead and sketch on it, come up with some designs and send them to me at info@theokayestengineer.com. I'd be super curious to see what you guys have in mind. That's going to do it for today. As always, go build something cool, never stop learning, and we'll see you on the next one.